and welcome to your next character lecture. So today we are looking at Sheila, and particularly we're looking at the idea that she represents, along with Eric, the younger generation who represent hope for the future. So we are going to learn some key vocab and quotes. We're going to analyse those quotes, and then we are going to think all about Priestley's intentions. How did he use Sheila as a vehicle for his own ideas? So first, a DNA. So pause the video here, try and answer all of these questions about Macbeth and play when you're ready for the answers. So here are the answers. Have a look and correct any that you got wrong and tick the ones that you got right. So again, this week we are looking to build those flashcards up. So this is all about Sheila. The next video is going to be all about Eric. So again, it'll be each character in the beginning, middle and the end. What are those 3 points? For each quote, do yourself a separate flashcard with the analysis on the back and then Priestley's intentions in each character. So let's start off, as we always do, with these opening stage directions because they're so helpful in exploring how these characters are presented before the inspector arrives. So here's the quote about Sheila. She is a pretty girl in her early 20s, very pleased with life and rather excited. So what's the idea? This shows that Sheila is a typical wealthy young woman. She doesn't work and is full of hope for her personal future, which is all about marrying well. That's all that she was really bothered about. The adjective pretty highlights that Sheila's hope for her future revolve around her marriage, something her looks will help her to secure, and it's quite superficial. She's quite a self-absorbed sort of person. It foreshadows how materialistic she is proven to be. Again, the adjectives pleased and excited also show Sheila's sense of achievement this evening. She is celebrating her engagement to a wealthy man. She can climb the social ladder and feels as though she has reached her goals. So why has Priestley presented her like this? It's to represent an infantile, so a childish, capitalist. She is totally self-obsessed and only has hopes for her marriage. That's her only goal. And it emphasises the pre-war presentation of women as weaker in a patriarchal society. So if we remember, patriarchal is meaning a society dominated by men. So let's start with her at the beginning of the play. So the first point is about her naivety. So she is naive to both the wider world and to the behaviour of her family and fiancé. She is very, very sheltered. So she mentions to Gerald in a half serious, half playful way, yes, except for all last summer when you never came near me. And these stage directions are really interesting. I think your adjectives half are really important in showing that actually Sheila has some suspicions about Gerald, but she's trying to bury them, she's trying to ignore them. So in some ways she is serious. There is a sense of discomfort and unease. She isn't quite sure of him and what he was doing. Maybe she doesn't altogether trust him. But she says it in a playful way. It's like she's trying to make light of it, trying to make out like it's a joke, but actually it's not. And this is our first clue that her relationship with Gerald is not perfect. Now, when she finds out about what's happened to Eva Smith, she is quite selfish. She says, I've been so happy tonight, I wish you hadn't told me. So actually, her upset is not around what happened to Eva Smith. It's actually because it's the effect on her. So when she says she's been so happy tonight, she's happy because she's trapped in her own little bubble and she's ignorant to the world that's going on around her and the plight of lower class people. And again, wishing, that verb is quite infantile, it's quite childish. She wants to be kept naive. She doesn't want to know about dark and unpleasant things that happened in the world. However, she does start to show us that she has the capacity for change. So when Mr. Burling says he had to fire Eva Smith, there was no other option, he needed to keep those costs down, she responds by saying that these girls aren't cheap labour, they're people. Now, on one hand, we can look at it's the start of socialism, potential for change, hope for the future, but she's still quite naive. So while she talks about the noun phrase cheap labour, she's exactly right. They aren't cheap labour, but by calling them girls, she's infantilizing them. She's making them seem like children. And again, that pronoun there, it's not the same as we, it's they. They're a very different kind of person. Sheila does not see herself as the same. They're just a concept that exists outside of her social bubble where she is very, very protected. At the beginning, she also behaves very immaturely, and this is allowed and actually encouraged by the way her parents treat her and also the way that Gerald treats her. So she calls her parents mummy and daddy, which is quite interesting because as she grows in maturity through the text, actually her conversation changes. They become mother and father by the end, but they start off as mummy and daddy. Now, Mr. Burling also tries to protect her from the knowledge of things that might upset her, which is again contributing to her naivety. So when she comes in and asks what's going on, Mr. Burling tells her it's nothing to do with you, Sheila, run along. Now, that verb phrase, run along, is something that you would say to a little child, perhaps a 5-year-old, to go and play somewhere else. And actually, we mustn't forget that Sheila is a woman in her 20s. She is an adult, she's getting married, but yet she's very much treated like a child. And Gerald does this too. So when he asks Sheila to leave, because he's about to confess how he was involved with Eva/Daisy, Sheila knows why he asks her to leave. She says, he means I'm getting hysterical now. So this idea of hysterical is interesting. So it's very much associated with emotions running high, but particularly in women. So any words that have that prefix hist often mean about the woman. So for example, a hysterectomy is a removal of the womb. And so hysteria is associated with madness and emotional turmoil that's only experienced by women. So actually quite a sexist presentation. And I think that's part of Priestley's view. He doesn't want these women to be treated like they can't deal with the real world. However, Mrs. Burling then comments, you seem to have made a great impression on this child, Inspector. So that noun impression, again, really interesting because younger people are naturally impressionable because you can be moulded, you can be taught things, you learn things from other people, and that's how you get your own views. The older that you are, the less impressionable you become because you've got your own views and experiences to draw upon. So it's quite interesting that she is seen as someone who is very malleable, someone who can be taught and whose views can be changed. And that's also linked through the noun child. Sheila is not a child, and yet Mrs. Burling seems to see the inspector as someone who's corrupted her child, someone who sees the world differently now, and she doesn't like it. And also at the start of the play, she is totally materialistic. She just cares about having stuff. And she uses this as a reason to behave really selfishly. So when she gets her ring from Gerald, she's absolutely thrilled. She says, it's perfect. Now I really feel engaged. So the fact that it's perfect, that adjective, by giving her the ring, Gerald has managed to successfully convince Sheila that their relationship is perfect, even though moments before she's just talked about how he never came near her for a whole summer, and she did feel uncomfortable about that. But now she's got the ring, that doesn't matter. She really feels engaged because of the ring. And actually, they were already engaged. He'd already asked her to marry, and she had already agreed. But when she says now, that adverb tells us that it's only when she gets this material possession that she truly feels engaged, because perhaps it's something to show off, something to boast about. And she tells her mother, look, mummy, isn't it a beauty? Oh, darling. And again, that noun mummy is very, very childish, and isn't it a beauty shows her how shallow she is, how superficial she is. All she cares about is whether it looks nice. She doesn't care about the deeper meaning. This beautiful ring exists, but it doesn't change the fact that she's not quite sure about Gerald. And a really small comment that Eric makes when Sheila and Mrs. Burling are in the drawing room just while Mr. Burling is about to make his capitalist speech. He says he left them talking about clothes, and he says, you'd think a girl never has any clothes before she gets married. So this is really interesting, and again it's priestly showing us this stereotypical of women as shallow and subservient to men, not able to join in with the real conversations. And Eric confirms this again by using the noun girl. His mother isn't a girl, she's a woman, and his sister is a woman, so infantilizing them, making them seem perhaps silly. And again, the noun clothes also shows us how materialistic they are. They're not talking about Sheila's relationship with Gerald or anything like that. They're just talking about clothes. There's nothing else to it. And again, the verb married, all that Sheila's life has been building up to is this moment where she is going to be married off to a wealthy man. And actually it doesn't matter that they're not a great fit for each other. It doesn't matter that Gerald, she feels suspicious about him. All that matters is she's getting married. It's a wealthy man above her social status, and she's got a lovely ring to prove it. So towards the end of Act 1, we find out about Sheila's crime. So she got Eva Smith fired from Millward's, the department store, for smiling in the mirror when Sheila was trying on a dress that didn't really suit her, and she thought that she was laughing at her, and so Sheila became very jealous and very angry. So she admits, I was in a furious temper. So this noun phrase is interesting. The idea that she's in a temper conjures an image of a small child having a tantrum, which essentially is exactly what Sheila did. And the fact that it was furious suggests she was out of control. And so she just used Eva Smith as somebody to take out her anger on, somebody totally innocent, because Eva had no chance fighting against somebody like Sheila. She would only be fired because Sheila was threatening to take her business elsewhere and her family were wealthy. And she admits that she's very superficial. She only cares about looks. So she justifies her behaviour by saying Eva was very pretty too, with big dark eyes, and that didn't make it any better. So these adjectives, big, dark, pretty, that again just shows that despite Sheila's privilege, her wealth and her family, all she cares about is looks, and that was what made her ultimately very, very jealous. That Eva Smith is pretty. She doesn't have anybody. She's a working class girl. She's very poor. She has to go and get a job. She can't just spend her days as she pleases, but she's pretty, and that's what Sheila is angry about. And she admits, if she'd been some miserable, plain little creature, I don't suppose I'd have done it. And that noun phrase is quite extended. The adjectives miserable, plain, little. It's almost what she expects from a working class girl. Somebody who is unhappy and unconfident, and because they're poor, they're expecting to see them as being not in the same league as Sheila. But actually she wasn't. She was pretty and she was confident. However, it also shows that Sheila's prejudiced again through the noun creature, because actually it's very dehumanising. She's not saying girl or woman, she's saying creature. It's like that the working class people are not remotely similar. They're not even the same species as her, and that's showing her prejudice. She's expecting all working class people to be miserable, plain little creatures, and they're not. It's actually exposing the real world to Sheila, and Sheila doesn't like it. And as she hears Eva's story and what happened, she starts to be quite sympathetic, but again, all she really thinks about is the consequences for herself. So when she sees the picture, the stage direction says she recognises it with a little cry, gives a half-stifled sob, and then runs out. So this triple is showing us guilt. So at first it's a little cry, perhaps a cry of horror, a shock, a half-stifled sob. So if you're half-stifled, she's trying not to cry, but somehow it just manages to get out. And so she's actually upset. She knows what she's done and she feels bad about it. And then she runs out. Now again, a childish response. She doesn't want to face up to her responsibilities. She wants to run away from them. However, the fact that she comes back shows us that she is willing later on to take some responsibility. She will face the truth and she will acknowledge what she's done. She also explains, I felt rotten about it at the time and now I feel a lot worse. So this shows us a few things. Actually, at the time, she did feel bad, but it didn't stop her from doing it. And she's focusing on herself and her own feelings. Now, I feel a lot worse. That repetition of I is showing how self-centered she is. What's interesting is that she explains around this section that actually she felt really bad about it at the time, but Mr. Burling told her it didn't matter. And that shows the sort of education Sheila's received from her parents. This is why she's so prejudiced against working class people and so ignorant to them. It's because her parents have been telling her it doesn't matter. You can treat them how you want and it doesn't matter. And again, at the end, she says, I feel now I can never go there again. Oh, why had this to happen? So this is just after the whole confession that she's made. And she talks about how she can't go to Millwoods. So again, you've got the repetition of I and the adverb never, which is very, very over dramatic. But ultimately, she feels like she can't go there because she's ashamed. It's not because she feels like she did something totally wrong. It's because she feels like she is ashamed of herself. And she says, oh, why had this to happen? So this rhetorical question shows her frustration. She probably does want to go shopping again, but now she can't go to her favourite department store, so she's quite frustrated by that. However, Sheila does redeem herself. She is the first character to accept any sort of responsibility for her actions and realise the error of her ways. So she says to the inspector miserably, so I'm really responsible. So the adverb miserably in the stage directions, she is upset. She knows that she's done wrong, but she's willing to take that responsibility no matter how sad she feels about it. And she promises, I'll never, never do it again to anybody. So the repetition of the adverb never shows us how sorry she is and how much regret and remorse she's filled with. But also, this noun anybody, it's not just to working class people or to my friends or my family. She is now starting to see working class people as the same as her. She appreciates they're all women, they're all having, in some ways, similar experiences, and it doesn't matter what class you are from at all. You're still a person and deserve to be treated with respect. And she acknowledges, I know I'm to blame and I'm desperately sorry. And the repetition of the pronoun I here is completely different from before. Instead of being worried about the consequences for herself, here she is taking almost sole responsibility for Eva Smith's suicide. And she isn't the only person to blame, but she really does feel this very, very intensely. It's again showing real remorse. And that verb blame, she's accepting it. She's saying, I know I've done something wrong. I understand that now. And you can blame me no matter how horrid it is. And she's desperately sorry. She's not just sorry, but that adverb desperately, it shows that she really does feel quite passionately about this. Sheila really has learnt from her experiences. She sees people as more equal through the classes. She is less naive to the plight of working class people. She is more worldly for this experience and takes other people's feelings into account. She can sympathise with them in a way that her parents can't, and she was never taught to. At the end, though, Sheila is a very interesting character. She really has changed. She learns from the inspector and becomes more insightful. She understands why he's there and what he is trying to teach the family. So she warns her mum, Mrs. Burling, you mustn't try to build up a kind of wall between us and that girl. Now, this is a complete U-turn from where she was at the beginning. She was calling them miserable, plain little creatures. Here, she's saying there is no wall. So that now wall, she's tearing it down. It's quite symbolic. It's a metaphor for showing us that everybody is the same. We are all people. And it's us and that girl. Again, that juxtaposition of those pronouns says that it's not different. We're all the same. And when she realises that Eric is the father of the baby, she's the first one. And she says with sudden alarm, Mother, stop, stop. So the alarm, again, is this recognition of what's happening around her. She is listening and she is concentrating, really thinking. And the proper noun mother shows that she's grown now. Before she was saying, oh, mummy, isn't it a beauty? And listening to Mr. Burling going, oh, sorry, daddy, I was listening actually. Now she's telling her parents what to do. She's taking some control by using the imperative stop, stop. She's trying to warn them. And it isn't her fault that they don't listen. And then towards the end, she says rather wildly with a laugh, no, he's giving us the rope, so we'll hang ourselves. So that adverb wildly, she's almost so frustrated, and she's just had this moment with her family, and she's just had this moment of realisation. I know why the inspector's here. He's telling us enough so that we'll admit what we did wrong. So the noun rope is actually a metaphor. It's about accepting that they will confess, because all of those things really, really did happen. They'll incriminate themselves. So she changes from being an infantile capitalist to a mature, passionate and socially responsible adult by the end. So actually she's quite confrontational towards her parents. She says bitterly, I suppose we're all nice people now. So that adverb bitterly shows she's angry with her mother and father for not taking any responsibility, and that she feels resent towards them rather than looking for their confirmation and their support. And again, that noun phrase, nice people, she's being very sarcastic. She knows they're not nice people. She knows that this changes absolutely nothing, whether the girl was real or not. And she even says, don't let's start dodging and pretending now. Between us, we drove that girl to commit suicide. So the verbs dodging and pretending, again, shows real insight. She wants her family to take responsibility, and she is telling them to do that. And she acknowledges that we're all part of it, that the whole family had a part to play. And as a society, we all have a responsibility. We're all part of something bigger. And she says, we drove that girl to commit suicide. That verb drove means that they forced her. Their poor behaviour led to her actions, that led to her death. And so she doesn't now feel she's exclusively to blame, but they all are. It's collective responsibility. And by the end, she even echoes the inspector's words and shows the values that actually the 1940s audience would really support and really believe in. And actually this presents her in a favourable way to a 1945 audience. She says, I remember what he said and how he looked and what he made me feel. Fire and blood and anguish. So we've got two sets of triples there. Said, looked and feel. So she's really taken on board her experience. Everything about the inspector has captivated her, because it's not just about how he looked as a person. It was perhaps the disappointment, maybe the anger, but also the impact that it had on her and her beliefs. She wants to change. She wants things to be different. And she echoes what the inspector says, fire and blood and anguish. And as the 1945 audience knows, that the world has been through 2 world wars by then. And she recognises that we all need to pull together to get through some of the more difficult national issues. And finally, she represents a hope for the future, because she is an empowered, responsible woman who challenges intransigent capitalism. So if we remember, intransigent means unwilling to change. So she challenges her parents, something she never would have done at the start. So they tell her to go to bed. They say they're hysterical and overtired, but actually she accuses her parents. It's you two who are being childish, trying not to face the facts. So you two, that direct address, it's accusatory. And childish, again, is really interesting. She is now acting like an adult. She is not behaving like a child. She's railing against this box her parents have put her in. And she is facing the facts. So the alliteration there is quite aggressive. It's that fricative sound, face the facts. She's angry with them. She's frustrated. She wants them to learn, and they aren't listening. And she says the point is, you don't seem to have learned anything. So the noun point, she knows why the inspector was there. That was the whole point, was to learn. And it's gone over Mr. and Mrs. Burling's heads, and Gerald's to an extent, because they're just trying to wriggle out of a public scandal. And she wants them to learn something. She wants them to learn how to be better people, to treat people with respect that they deserve. And she even says, it frightens me the way you talk, and I can't listen to any more of it. So that verb frightens, she is quite frightened by them. She's frightened by the fact that she knows what she's done, and she knows the effect it had on Eva Smith. And she doesn't want that to happen again. And she's frightened that her parents don't seem to care. It seems very callous and very cold. And the juxtaposition of those pronouns, me and you, they are not on the same team anymore. She's banging the socialism drum, whereas her parents are banging the drum for capitalism. They are at political odds. And she can't listen to it. The fact she can't listen to it, that verb, makes it sound like she's disgusted with their behaviour. She doesn't want to be part of it, and she's distancing herself from her parents, something she didn't do at the start. And she passionately says, "You're pretending everything's just as it was before." So that adverb passionately, she feels really strongly. Mrs. Burling was right. He had made a great impression on her because of her age. She is hope for the future. She is the hope that things will change, because it needs the younger generation to move things forward and challenge the existing older world views of capitalism, which is judgmental and an exclusive class system. By getting Sheila to understand that everybody's the same, we are a community and our actions have consequences, actually Sheila is very, very hopeful. And she really confronts her parents by saying, "You're pretending," because she knows they're just pretending. She knows nothing they say can be trusted. It can't be real. So what were Priestley's intentions with Sheila? So ultimately, she is part of Priestley's attempt to address the gender inequality. So in 1912, it was very patriarchal society, and she starts off as this naive, materialistic capitalist, but ends as an empowered socialist woman, and she isn't submissive as a daughter or a fiancée anymore. So by rejecting Gerald's ring at the end, Priestley demonstrates that women can have power beyond marriage. So actually, it's not the be-all and end-all, marriage. It's a part of life, but actually it's a part of something much, much bigger. If we think about the historical time period between 1912 and 1945, women's strength in society grew because through both of the world wars, they joined the workforce, they were working factories, they got the vote, they engaged with wider society, and really here he's saying women are capable of so much more than just marriage. There's more to life than that, and they are much more capable. And she distances herself from her parents as she learns from the inspector, and she echoes his words at the end to show who she aligns herself with. And these are valued beliefs in the 1940s, and people here would really celebrate Sheila's change. She's learnt from experience and she's become a better person. And he also shows that actually it's the youth, it's the young people who have power to improve the world for the better. It's not the older people, it's new ideas, it's a new way of looking at things that will really make a change.